Before I read the title of this work by John Cage, I need to tell you something about it. I've had a number of students in the past who have guessed that it means 4 feet and 33 inches, and I'm sorry to say that just isn't right. Although John Cage certainly was a bit of a character, his work both as a composer and as a musical philosopher are very thoughtful and basically quite serious. So what does this title mean, and what does it have to do with John Cage's musical thought? The title means 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Think about it. 4 minutes and 33 seconds. The title certainly is evocative, but in fact it's intended to be informative. Indeed, it's basically prescriptive, as we shall see. It's quite clear that Cage was preoccupied with time when he created this work. Notice that I have mentioned preoccupations in connection with the first 2 composers in this unit, and I expect you to remember those preoccupations in connection with either a work or with a composer's career. Here we see a preoccupation in connection with a work. This work is very interesting in terms of its genre. It's one of those types of compositions that is supposed to lead one to examine an aspect of music in some depth. And I would call it a philosophical essay. It's definitely a composition that makes a statement about something. And here it is a statement about the nature of music and the composer's involvement in music. And one can certainly hear the voice of Cage in this composition, but not hear it in the usual way. Now, I don't mean to be cryptic about this composition. Indeed, my intent is to explain, not to confound, to illuminate, not to obscure. But this is one of these compositions that you need to think about. And you need to think about its elements separately. And in fact, its performing forces tell you something about the composition. It's very flexible. This piece can be performed by any number or combination of instruments. Think of it, a work for any number or combination of instruments. So it could be 1 instrumentalist or 1,000 instrumentalists. Now that we have these things in mind, we can consider what the composition is all about. There is a performance of this work available to you. I posted a link to a podcast that has perhaps a definitive performance of this composition recorded on it. But before you take a look at that, let me tell you how this composition works. Basically, the performer or the performer goes out onto the stage, sits down, sits there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and then the person gets up and walks off. Basically, it's the kind of composition that you or anyone else can perform. Now let's think about what is happening here. A performer goes out onto the stage, sits down, sits there for a period without making any typical musical sound, and then departs after a specified period. It might sound at first glance like some sort of an artistic hoax. But is it really an artistic hoax? Think about it. Cage defined music as sound in time. Now, if we were to take a look at what the performer is doing during this composition, we might point to an absence of sound, and that might seem to indicate that no music actually is being produced here. So Cage's definition does not even cover his own composition. Cage, however, had thought through all of this very carefully, and he had plenty of opportunity to do so when he went to Harvard University. His reason for visiting that place was to see its anechoic chamber, basically a room that absorbed all the sounds from the environment. Cage spent not only hours, but days in this room, listening carefully. And he came to the conclusion that a person cannot experience absolute silence. A person in a sound-free environment will still be confronted with sounds. That is, even if there aren't sounds in the environment about you, you could hear the sound of your own breath, the sound of your own heart beating, etc. And Cage wrote this composition during a time when he was wondering whether or not composers actually had any business telling performers exactly what notes to sing or to play. And it would seem that he used his own definition of music, sound in time, to suggest a procedure for creating a piece of music without actually prescribing the pitches to be sung or played. In our experience of music in this course, we have seen that composers have written compositions. They've written down all the notes and perhaps even performing details about their compositions. And the duration of the work, or the length of time that it takes to perform it, was basically a product of the performance. Cage, in this composition, has simply approached the process of composition from the opposite direction. He has simply prescribed the length of time that the composition should last, and he left the dimension of sound to chance or to the environment. Many composers after the time of Cage and after this composition have been willing to leave certain things to chance. That's one of the lessons of this work. The other lesson, and the one that I want you to take away from this composition, is that silence in music is relative. It is not absolute. If musicians stop playing or singing at some point within a composition, there's still going to be some sound somewhere because the environment, indeed our very own bodies, continue to provide us with an array of sounds. And as you can see, these sounds can have some musical significance. We've seen a composer in this music, Varese, who made it his life's work to track down new musical sounds. And here we find another extreme approach, leaving the sounds up to chance. Basically, although there can be silences in music, silence has a certain sound. So when you think of this composition, think of the sound of silence over a duration of 4 minutes and 33 seconds. The sound of silence.